All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. This week's portion is VaYikra, and so starting the third of the 5 books of the Torah. I'm just curious if people hear like a buzzing in the background. Good, because there's construction work going on the walkway bridge, and it sounds pretty loud to me, but I'm glad you don't hear it. Good. So what I wanted to focus on in this week's Parsha begins on page 595 in the Eitz Chaim, or chapter 4 of Leviticus. So the book of VaYikra begins a shift in the Torah from narrative to law. So you kind of have a little bit of the transition from narrative with the portions describing how to build the Mishkan and then how the people built the Mishkan. I mean, that really, in a sense, it's narrative because it's describing what the people are doing, but it's not like telling a story like on the 3rd day of the 3rd month, this is what happened with the people of Israel, which you had from all of Genesis and all of Exodus up until the portion Mishpatim, essentially. So now VaYikra focuses really almost entirely on law, especially on sacrifices and other things that Kohanim would be involved in. So not just sacrifices, but also laws of ritual purity related to the body. So we'll see that in a few weeks. And the only narrative portion is in 2 weeks from today, the portion, well, it'll be more than that, when we get to the portion Shmini, when we hear about and read about the death of 2 of Aaron's sons. So in describing all of that, I just wanted to be sure we understand that the book of Leviticus is different from what came before and what comes after in the Torah, which prompted biblical scholars over the centuries to suggest that maybe there's a different author at work with the book of Leviticus than in the prior or subsequent books of the Torah. So, and it's just a theory. It's a strong theory in biblical scholarship circles and in academia, this idea of a documentary hypothesis, that is, that there are different documents that came together as the Torah was edited, and perhaps the author or the editors of the book of Leviticus were of the priestly family, so it's the P source that we have here in the book of Leviticus. So I can't say one way or the other that theory is accurate, because we don't know. The oldest book of the Torah that we have goes back to the Dead Sea Scrolls 2,000 years. We have bits and pieces of verses of the Torah that have been found in archaeological discoveries, like an amulet that has the priestly blessing on it from the First Temple period, but we don't have a complete, nowhere near a complete Torah scroll older than the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we really don't know when the Torah was written, how it was written, and how it was passed down. So we only have theory. Okay, so that's enough of a background about the book of Leviticus. This week's portion focuses on some of the different sacrifices that would be offered in the Mishkan, in the portable tabernacle, later in the temple in Jerusalem too. And next week's portion, Tzav, continues that discussion a little bit too. So I wanted to focus on chapter 4, and if we have time to get to chapter 5, on two of these special sacrifices. One is called a Chata'at, that's chapter 4. One is called Asham, that's chapter 5. So I wanted to spend some time looking at this Chata'at, what the word Chet, Tet, Aleph means, and how we understand this. So 595 in the Eitz Chaim, the start of chapter 4, which is the start of the fifth Aliyah. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, nefesh ki techeta bishgaga mikol mitzvot Adonai asher lo te'asena ve'asa me'achat mehena. A person, so nefesh. Nefesh in modern Hebrew is soul. In biblical and rabbinic Hebrew, it is body. So a body that that commits a sin. So that's the old, more traditional translation of chet, tet, aleph, and so chet, tet, aleph is the noun sin. Techeta is a verb form of the noun to sin. So a person who would sin bishgaga, by mistake, from all of the commandments of God. So this gets to how we can translate sin. So sin, I'm using the traditional as opposed to the Eitz Chaim, which says incur guilt. So incur guilt is a more PC or less judgmental kind of translation. I don't see judgment in using the word sin or to sin. For me, the understanding is there are commandments to follow. And if one neglects a commandment, whether on purpose or by mistake, that is a sin or a transgression or a violation. So we could translate the word techeta or the noun chet as a transgression or a violation. Sin, I think, has more of a connotation of a religious violation or transgression. That's how I understand it. So I think that's the way I'm going to translate it, and it is violating a mitzvah. Yeah, a violation of a mitzvah or a transgression of a mitzvah. That's what a chet is. So a person who sins by mistake from all of the mitzvot of God, not from all, or any of all of the mitzvot of God that you're not supposed to do. In other words, you are supposed to observe Shabbat, and somebody violates the Shabbat on purpose or by mistake. That's what this is talking about. And did one of these things. That is, one violated one of the commandments. Verse 3. Im hakohen hamashiach yecheta. So I think it's now, these are examples of people who are sinning. If im hakohen hamashiach yecheta laashmat ha'am vehikriv al chatato asher chata par ben bakar tamim la'adonai lechatat. If the anointed priest sins, and by sinning has made the people guilty, like something that Kohen did would then impart guilt on the whole congregation of people. Like he's supposed to bring an offering on Yom Kippur, and that offering on Yom Kippur is supposed to take care of all of the people, atone for all the people. And if he does it wrong, either by mistake or on purpose, then the entire people are at fault or incur guilt because the Kohen hasn't done it right. Okay? So if the anointed priest sins, causing the people to be guilty, then he should. So the vav here for VaYikra, the first word of the second line on 596, the vav there is not and, it's more of a this is what he should do. He should offer or make a sacrifice for the sin that he sinned, a 1-year-old bull, a bull of the herd without blemish, but it's a 1-year-old bull of the herd without blemish, tamim, without blemish. That would be the chata'at that the Kohen Gadol offers. So the Kohen makes a mistake, sins, and by sinning has caused the people to incur guilt. Then what he has to bring is a year-old bull without blemish as a sin offering, like to say you're sorry to God. Verse 4, Vehevi et hapar el petach ohel moed lifnei Adonai, v'samach et yado al rosh hapar, v'shachat et hapar lifnei Adonai. So he should bring. So this is the offering, this 1-year-old bull. What does he do with it? He brings the bull to the opening of the tent of meeting before God, and he places his hands on the head of the bull and slaughters the bull before God. Okay, so samach yado, to lay hands. Rabbinic ordination is called smicha, the laying of hands. So that's an ancient practice going back 2,000 years of how rabbis would be ordained. People, the rabbi ordaining the student to become a rabbi, would lay hands on the person's head. So this was done to me and members of my class in rabbinical school back in the day. It was laying on of hands and also placing a tallis on me as well. It was a gift of the rabbinical school to all the rabbinical students to lay hands. It's interesting that when Paul Tillis's son, Ravid, was ordained, I was privileged to be invited to that and saw how he was ordained by, so it wasn't just the head of the rabbinical school, but it was each rabbinical candidate could have someone recite a blessing for them. So Stephen Abraham had invited me to say the blessing for him, so to kind of do the laying of the hands and a blessing for him before he then would go on with the rest of his class to the head of the rabbinical school to recite a blessing as well. So ordination can be done in a variety of ways, but the word samicha, the laying of the hands, is from this, from the book of Leviticus, the laying of the hands on the offering itself. Verse 5, Velakach hakohen hamashiach midam hapar vehevi oto el ohel moed. And then the anointed priest takes from the blood. So the bull is slaughtered. The blood has to be drained the blood is brought to the tent of meeting. 6, v'taval hakohen et etzba'o badam, vehiza min hadam sheva pa'amim lifnei Adonai et penei parochet hakodesh. And the priest should dip his finger in the blood and should sprinkle from the blood 7 times before God on the parochet, the ark covering, the holy ark covering. Or it says here, the curtain of the shrine. Okay, so parochet. So in our sanctuary at Sharei Tefillah, you open the doors and the Torahs are right there. But in the chapel of you open the doors and there's a curtain. So it is common for arks in synagogues not just to have a door, but also to have a curtain. So it's 2 layers that you have to open before you see the Torahs in the ark. So you don't have to have a curtain. The only place that has to have a curtain is the Mishkan, but to kind of understand that synagogues are a substitute for the temple and for the Mishkan, sometimes the ark will have not just a door, but also a curtain. So the ark in the sanctuary in our building on Lockwood Drive had a curtain, but it did have a door, but those doors stayed open all the time. So I remember that from Lockwood Drive. We never closed the doors. It was just the curtain. And in the chapel, that also was just a curtain and not a door, from what I remember. It's been a while. It's been 19 years almost since we've been on Lockwood Drive. So that's what I remember. So either a curtain or a door or both. Okay, so the blood, he dips his finger in the blood that was drained from that bull that was slaughtered, and he sprinkles the blood 7 times on the parochet of the ark. And then 7, Venatan hakohen min hadam al karnot mizbach ketoret hasamim lifnei Adonai asher ba'ohel moed ve'et kol dam hapar yishpoch el yesod mizbach ha'olah asher petach ohel moed. And then he gives, the Kohen gives from the blood, or puts from the blood on either the corners of the incense altar. It says here the horns of the altar. So we'd have to see how the incense altar was supposed to be designed and built. Are there horns? Are there things sticking out of the corners of them? So it could be the corners of the incense altar. He's supposed to put blood on that too before God, which is in the tent of meeting. And all of the blood of the bull he should spill out at the base of the altar of the offering that is at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Okay, so he's taking from the blood and sprinkling it on the curtain, and he's taking from the blood and putting it on the corners of the incense altar, and then he's spilling out all the blood. And this is a lot of blood, by the way. We're talking about a bull. It's a big animal. Pouring out the blood at the base of the altar, which is the altar of the burnt offering. That's the altar that the bull is going to be put on to be offered, okay? So there's a lot to do with the blood. I want to read a little bit more and then just talk a little bit about this process and what it's supposed to represent. Verse 8, Ve'et kol chelev par hachatat yarim mimenu et hachelev hamechaseh al hakerev ve'et kol hachelev asher al hakerev. And the fat of this bull of sin offering, he will lift up out of it the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is around the entrails. 9, ve'et shtei haklayot ve'et ha'chelev asher alehen asher al hakesalim ve'et hayoteret al hakaved al haklayot yesirena. So, and the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them and the loins, and the loins, right, the fat that's from the kidneys that's on the loins, and the leftover fat on the liver, and the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys. Okay, the Hebrew is a little bit awkward here. So you got the kidneys, and you have the loins, and you have the liver, and you have the fat that's all around them. He has to get rid of all the fat. 10. Ka'asher yuram mishor zevach hashlamim vehiktiram hakohen al mizbach ha'olah. Just as it was done with the ox of the peace offering, the Kohen should turn it into smoke on the burnt offering altar. So you take the fat out first, and you put the fat on the altar and make sure it turns into smoke, like it burns up completely and turns into smoke. 11, ve'et or hapar, ve'akol besaro al rosho ve'al kra'av ve'kirbo ufirsho. And the skin of the bull and all of its flesh on its head and on its legs and on its insides and its dung, all of that also is burnt. Okay? So for a sin offering, the entirety of the bull is burnt. Everything around the animal and the good stuff and the bad stuff. 12. Vehotzi et kol hapar el michutz lamachaneh el makom tahor el shefech hadeshen v'sarafoto al eitzim ba'esh al shefech hadeshen yisaref. And then he takes out the bull from outside the camp to a pure place, to the ash heap, and burns it, that is the bull, on wood, in fire, on the ash heap, he shall burn it. Okay, so all of this to discuss for us this sin offering, and the idea behind a sin offering is, a couple things come to mind. First, the idea that God understands that we're going to make a mistake. So, as opposed to, right, we might not be so understanding just a second here. Something's happening with my phone. The phone just started to record in a text what I was saying, so I needed to stop that. So that we might expect from the Torah that the God to be harsh and to be black and white. You have to do this, and if you don't do this, then this happens. Without a gray area, we might not expect the God and the Torah to understand, well, maybe something could go wrong by mistake, or maybe something happens that doesn't quite fit the rules and regulations that have already been handed down. So the idea that there is this sense of fallibility, that we do make mistakes, is, I think, progressive for the time of the Torah, from the historical time that the Torah is around. Yes, Sumner, unmute yourself. Just get the arrow, get your cursor to go to the mute, to the audio button to the bottom left. Just make it not red. Just click on that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Excuse me. Do we know the source of all the details of what the reading is that you've just gone through?
What do you mean the source? Like who wrote the Torah?
Well, I mean, why? I mean, the details about the fat and what's actually taken and what's not taken. And...
No, well, the source is the same source as the rest of the Torah. Either God gave it to Moses at Mount Sinai, God taught it to Moses, and Moses wrote it down, or this was oral tradition that was passed down from generation to generation and then edited at some point later in Jewish history. We don't know, but this is what has been accepted as the way to offer sacrifices. And in fact, what's taught here, we really don't read about again in the rest of the Bible. We do have accounts in the rest of the Bible of people bringing sacrifices to the temple, but we don't have an account in as clear a way, except a little bit in the prophet Ezekiel. We don't have an account in a specific way of how exactly the Kohanim went about doing this. So we have the law presented here in the book of Leviticus, but then we don't have anywhere else in the Bible an account of how the people actually followed through and did it exactly in this way. Okay, so which begs the question, then how did people sacrifice, and what kind of sacrifices were done, and how well did the Kohanim follow through on the laws that are presented here? So that's a whole other question about are these laws of the book of Leviticus in a vacuum, like they're taught and then they were never followed ever again, or were they taught and maybe they were done differently? We don't know. We do know that in the Mishnah, the first edited law code edited by the rabbis 1800 years ago, the laws about how to do the sacrifices are based on this book of Leviticus. But the rabbis also are teaching these laws at a time when the temple has already been destroyed. So, are they teaching it from memory? Like, did any of the first rabbis actually witness the sacrifices being offered in this way? Or were the rabbis teaching based on the book of Leviticus that these are the laws, so that when the temple is to be rebuilt someday, we'd have a third temple in Jerusalem, then this is how it's going to be done. So all I'm saying, Sumner, in a long, drawn-out answer to your question is not just about the source. We don't really know for sure how these laws about the sacrifices were carried out. So we have the text here in the book of Leviticus. We have the Mishnah from the rabbis, And that's really it. Because let me take off from my shelf. These are 2 of 6 volumes of Mishnah. You see the Hebrew word here, Mishnah. Okay, it says Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders or 6 volumes of Mishnah. So this one on the right says Seder Kodashim. So that's about sacrifices. And the second one on the left, Seder Taharot, all about ritual purity. Okay? These 2 volumes of Mishnah have, there's only, in a volume, a Seder, a volume is divided into tractates. Of the tractates in these 2 volumes, there's only one that has Talmud on it, and that's Nida, the laws of family purity, when married women bleed and how to purify themselves from that. So that's the only practical law of purity that is still within the Orthodox traditional Jewish world still observed today, because those laws of purity are not contingent upon a sacrifice being offered in order to be purified. It's only contingent upon going to the mikveh. So everything else related to laws of purity and laws of sacrifice aren't done today, can only be done with a offering being brought to the temple. And since there hasn't been a temple in 1955 years, the rabbis haven't spent time focusing on those laws. So essentially, the book of Leviticus is, for all intents and purposes, a book which is theoretical as opposed to practical. But nonetheless, the rabbis did say that when children, this is a tradition, it's not the case for Jewish day schools today, or at least non-Orthodox Jewish day schools today. The rabbis had a tradition that the first book of the Torah that children are supposed to study is the book of Leviticus, which seems bizarre, because how can children 5 years old really understand everything that the book of Leviticus is talking about related to sacrifices and things like that? And it's really gory. The rabbi said, no, the children are innocent and pure, and they should be studying a book about purity and innocence. That's the idea. But my kids who went to the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, now you start, and I myself, when I started day school in kindergarten way back when at the Kelman Academy, the Solomon Schechter School in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, my kids started with Genesis. And really with the story of Abraham and Sarah and the portion Lech Lecha. That's really the beginning, the first thing that students study today in day school. So there's that idea to make Leviticus still practical in terms of what we study. And there's also the idea of how the understanding that prayer is the substitute for sacrifice today. Okay, and that's a bit of a stretch, but the reason we bring sacrifices can apply to the reasons why we pray. Okay, so there's a peace offering that's described earlier in this portion. There's this sin offering if we make a mistake. There's a guilt offering if we do something on purpose. These variety of sacrifices could also be a variety of reasons why we pray and ask God for forgiveness, or to thank God, or to praise God. So the Amida especially is seen as the substitute for sacrifice. The Amida, which serves as the core prayer of the three services that we pray every day, each one of those services has an Amida in it, and it has, on a weekday, 19 blessings in it. The first three are always the same, no matter what day of the year it is, and no matter what time of day it is. The first three are all about praising God. The last three are all about thanking God. The last three are always the same also. The middle changes depending on whether it's a weekday or a holiday or Shabbat. And in the weekday, we ask God to fulfill, to answer our pleas or requests. That's a weekday, or Shabbat or holiday, we're focusing on the gift of Shabbat or the holiday, or if it's Rosh Hashanah, we're focused on God as sovereign of the universe in a different way, that the sovereignty plays out with sovereignty, with shofar, with history, etc., etc. So anyway, the Amida itself is a direct substitute for the sacrifices themselves, and so we might think, and the Reform movement is known for this, we might think that this is doesn't apply anymore, that these laws are obsolete. So in the Reform movement, their prayers are such that any traditional prayer that had a reference to sacrifice would be omitted from the service, because sacrifice has no place in modern religious thought or sensibility. Whereas the conservative movement says that's not necessarily true. We have to understand everything about the sources for who we are today, and we can certainly be involved in evolving these ideas. So we remember the sacrifices, but we don't necessarily look forward to sacrifices happening in the future. Whereas in the Orthodox denominations, they remember the sacrifices and look forward to offering the sacrifices again. So it's all a matter of degree regarding sacrifices. Do we forget about it completely because it's just so gross and barbaric, and we've evolved to the point where we don't appreciate and we shouldn't appreciate sacrifices anymore? Do we remember the power that sacrifices had, because everybody did sacrifices back when these laws were presented 2,500, 3,000 years ago, however long ago it was? Everybody did sacrifices, and so this is the way that Jewish people are doing sacrifices, and we remember, if done with sincerity, just like if prayers are done with sincerity, if we behave in a moral, ethical way, then it's powerful, it's transformative of our being. So that's the point of bringing the sacrifice, that it's a concrete physical act we're doing in order to help transform ourselves from the mistake that we made, or the intentional transgression that we did, or the intentional power of joy or celebration and thanksgiving we're feeling. We have something concrete to offer to God to express that emotion and to fix, if the situation warrants, fix ourselves in the process too. So it is powerful to read, though sometimes reading it, it's like when I just read moments ago about dipping your finger in the blood and pouring the blood out, and then getting rid of the fat, finding the fat, cutting it out, burning it on, and then stripping the animal of its skin and cutting it up. I mean, it's all gross. It's all gross. I mean, it's still done today. Anybody who eats meat today knows that the butcher has to do this. We go to the kosher market to buy the meat. It's already packaged for us. And, if you're not vegetarian, it's not that disgusting to buy chicken or meat. But if you think about where it came from and how it got to that point, that's pretty gross. And certainly, I know by the time my kids were in the day school, they didn't do this trip anymore. But I remember Paul Tillis's daughter, at least, took a trip to the Empire Chicken Factory up outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to see how chickens are processed in a kosher way for consumption. And it, many students came back from that trip um, wanting to be vegetarian after what they saw take place in that factory. Now, by the time my kids were there, they didn't do that trip anymore. And the funny thing about that trip is that they would combine it with going to Hershey Park. So you go to the Empire Factory and then you go to Hershey Park. I'm not sure how many people were really in the mood to go on a
Yeah.
roller coaster or a merry-go-round after being in the Empire Chicken Factory. So anyway, so we have a lot of mixed feelings about reading uh, the book of Leviticus, reading about the sacrifices, reading about how animals are prepared for slaughter. Now, I will say, and this is not to be apologetic about it, but we always, when we study Torah, we always have to understand the context from which it is given. So we might expect Torah to be universal and eternal, that no matter what time and place we're reading it, it should make sense to us and should be spiritual and should be uplifting. But that's not necessarily the case, and not fair, because it's like the stories that it's telling about the people and how they're behaving, and also the laws really have to be understood in its historical context. So if we understand how other societies were offering sacrifices and compare that to the Torah, we will find for the most part that the Torah's description is a bit more progressive than other societies. For example, child sacrifice. Other societies at the time were known to have child, if not human, sacrifice, right? And the Torah is absolutely, unambiguously opposed to that. So there's that idea. We're only sacrificing animals. And the other idea is that there's a pay scale. In other words, the people bringing the sacrifices can bring what they can afford, right? We don't force people to bring a bull, because a bull's pretty expensive. We do say to people, you do have to make an offering. But this is the ideal. Well, no, there's a bull, or there's a sheep, or there's a goat, or there's a chicken, or there's grain. So that's the sliding scale. And many of the sacrifices have those options as alternatives based on what one can afford. So that's pretty progressive as well. And then the reason for bringing the sacrifice is also spiritual as well. There are, if God wants us to follow the covenant, God understands, like I started the session today, that we'll make mistakes, that we're not perfect, that we can't live up to everything in the covenant all the time. So the fact that God presents to us ways in which we can make up for the mistakes, and even ways to make up for the intentional transgressions that we do, that I think is a beautiful concept too, of working in partnership with God. God understands that we're not perfect, but here's a system in which we can overcome our imperfections and try to be perfect. So we have the laws presented in the portion Mishpatim earlier in chapter 20 and such in Exodus, how to behave to our fellow human beings. And we have the book of Leviticus to help us how to behave towards God. And this is the way in which we can be holy, because the middle of the Torah comes in chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus, how to be holy. So the bringing the sacrifices is, and following the covenant in general, is our way of trying to achieve the highest spiritual status that we can, and that is of holiness. Okay, we'll stop here for today, and next week. Next week is not Passover yet, so we will meet next Wednesday. The following Wednesday is a question. I'll still have, that will be during Passover, but I'll have family here, so I'm not sure if we're going to have class on the 16th. But the 9th will have class, the 23rd will have class, the 16th is a question. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.